different and create new opportunities for your business. Or you're an ops guy who believes that they just discovered this wealth of profound innovation in developers who have typically been dismissed and not in the context of an operational environment. And it's kind of a reaction to the waterfall siloed world. And then there's the folks in the PMO office who discovered that there's this new manufacturing line that involves software that could potentially help them reinvent their businesses. And you can, I don't know if you guys go shopping at Safeway or whatever, the new Safeway app. It's a waterfall world, a company I never thought would ever adopt Agile. And they fired their whole PMO office so they could go more Agile. It's pretty funny to watch. And you're like, wow, I don't know if I'd go down that route, but that's awesome, right? You get a couple calls out there. So I believe it's the same conversation, but I believe it's coming from 3 different audiences. And let me see if I can go this way. I also believe from an Agile perspective, that innovation comes from 4 different sources. And most people don't forget this. So I believe that innovation can be forced from the top down with changing markets. Unless you're watching those markets, you'll never be in a conversation where you can innovate fast enough to stay in those markets. I also believe that at the bottom, your peers actually innovate while you're manufacturing. And most people forget in their retrospectives that the idea isn't just to improve, but it's to capture the brilliant ideas that happen in these contexts of brilliant conversations. The other side is the people you hate the most, the tools you hate the most, they actually can produce and teach you things that you intuitively know, but you forget to document. So you're constantly learning whether you know or not. And likewise, being involved in communities, you can be engaged in things that will change the way that you run your business. I didn't start with Agile, so I discovered Agile after I tried to control my way into innovative companies, right? I tried to dictate with CMMI and ITIL. Thought if we could just keep those developers from throwing new stuff at it, we'd be perfect. We'd actually take over the world with a perfect software environment that could run a business. Pretty soon I kind of traced back level 3 issues, find out that there's no way where we're going to stop this change. You better embrace it and start the influence. So I've come full circle. And what I believe is there's all kinds of data you need to capture. The history of activity in here. I'm not even going to go through this stuff, but I believe that the 3 stages of conversation, whether it's CI/CD, which if you're in the Scrum or Kanban world, I don't care. But there's this full circle of operations PR group that we call ITSM, and then there's the folks that actually use the software, folks that watch how software is being used, and then how that gets back and translates all the way full circle back to the folks that make it. So I believe there's this continuous loop or business agility that is potentially available out there. And that there's this new market, back when there was a job description for waterfall developers, they were looking for Homer with his limited knowledge because he could sit in the cube for 8 hours a day with a box of donuts, and he was totally content. And he was a very successful developer because ITIL said, you're only going to change once a quarter anyways, and you're going to work on projects that are 3 years, but are longer than your career path, so you'll never see the light of day on your applications effort. And if you're happy with that, we love you. Right? But now developers are engaged with teams that can transparently see all the way through the end of game, get it published out there. And today what they're looking for is somebody somewhat villainous but has a good side, right? They can break bureaucracy and systems, and still in a concept that someone has is smuggle in innovation in spite of the fact the company doesn't want it. We're looking for Megamind over here. This is a project I'm working on, and what we're trying to do is learn about where people improve, innovate, and we can always go out to markets and look for new technologies. We can always go outside the company and look for new people. But the reality is the brilliance and the innovation of most companies is sitting right in the cubes that they have today, sitting with the Scrum teams, using the tools that they have, but the tools tend to not become part of the Agile practices. Like, the tools shouldn't dictate what a project team should have, but the tools should capture those things. And I can go through why we picked out this tool set, but we're actually trying to teach developers about software-driven networks or networks as software. Yet another layer in which the developer can sit down, can see what is potentially there in an underutilized innovation area called cavity, fill in the cavity with better performing application pieces, and really drive it out. The trick is all of this information needs to be stored in here and in the context of a project template, because those projects are going to get used over and over again. So I have a core belief that there are 2 building blocks for Agile and DevOps that, from a company perspective, unless you invest in those, you should never, ever get into Agile because it just gets more expensive with no benefits if you're going to leave it up to the Agile teams. If you're not going to pay attention to all your stakeholders and the way that they collaborate together and keep track of that for the life of the application, you're never going to improve. Also, if you can't keep it versioned so that the folks know what an operational environment looks like, what a project team looks like, and what how to measure success over time, you're not going to be able to compare and contrast over that period of time. So I'm a big believer in continuous learning, continuous improvement, as well as the iterative feedback loops that come out of the whole practice that's out there. I think Agile is here to help business agility. It's not to make the cultural life of the developer, a happy state. I think that's a great framework because that makes it more fun to be on the teams. But it's really to drive business agility, to bring down the size and scope of the projects, and making the organizations infinitely better. Now, I work with large organizations. This intuitively happens with your eyes closed and one hand tied behind your back in small startups. You don't have to train this. This just happens, right? You're able to go from don't distract in Scrum to completely abandon that effort and fix whatever's broken in operations. But in big enterprise organizations, they silo those up so that you don't always respond to the little nit issues that are disrupting business services. But at the same time, you're able to keep the business relevant in the industries because you're keeping the teams together and focused. So we refer to this as the infinite loop. And the project I'm working with is this new layer of conversations that we want to educate those in the DevOps environments. There's yet another layer of innovative transparency to actually build with the network environments. Don't have to test it out. We can wrap it up and throw it into an SDLC environment, which is part of an Agile and a DevOps piece, so we can continuously learn whether we're talking in the earliest stages of development and or if we're pushing out to production. So I'll come back to this one. This is my infinite loop. Now, what I really believe happens with Agile teams is that the collaboration that is learning here in a protected Scrum team that's exposed out here in constant learning is the most of the feedback that happens for an Agile team flies back into the conversation weeks after the Agile teams have left, have been shut down, and after the applications are out there. And it's a problem with the Agile process. I'll say, my conversation, my hope is that enterprise rediscover their startup, their internal startup capabilities. So it gets to be fun creating again, and that you're not defined by bureaucracy, you're really defined by the market potential as it changes and your ability to adapt to that. Likewise, I also think that Agile teams have to recognize that organizations have a built-in, large Agile teams have built-in Alzheimer's or memory issues, okay? They are great in the moment, great conversations, but those Agile teams come and go in the beat of a heartbeat, relative to the larger organization. And unless you're doing knowledge sharing between the teams, so real-time learning amongst the teams and with the teams, similar to the presentation we had earlier, you also need to remember over time. So the two biggest challenges to Agile are people separated by distance, time zones, buildings, however you want to separate them, also by time itself. So the knowledge between a project I'm working on today, when I'm going to get called back onto a project like this 2 years from now, and I can't recreate the environment that helped us innovate in the moment that we really kind of jumped ahead. I need ways to capture the in-context learning, the collaborative thoughts. I'm never going to be able to put together the whole team I had together 3 years ago, so I've got to put together partials. Also, teams are hired based on skill sets around the world, and if the teams are learning in Northern Europe, and they accelerate in areas where we have been, from our imagination, we've been blocked at really uncovering, learning from those regions and pushing those things out there.
2 minutes.
Got it. So my Agile lightning talk here is really about the infinite loop of community that sits between the distributed areas, so that we all know that distributed Agile teams are tough, making sure that Agile over time is accommodated, and Agile over cross-discipline functionality. So Agile eventually pushes into a DevOps because there is no need for operations that needs to hide behind a silo. With a lot of the software-defined data centers, the infrastructure as code, all of that's coming back into engineering, and I'll leave you with two thoughts. Every company has two bad habits. They either spit or they suck. Right? And what happens is, if the DNA is a spitting DNA, it means that they engineer themselves faster than the infrastructure can keep up, and they have a problem with spitting everywhere. And it's kind of a bad habit. They spit out production with no corporate strategy long term. Agile development teams can create environments like that with Netflix, and they believe they can engineer themselves out of a problem. There's other companies that suck so bad that they want to control the innovation at a way that they have change tolerance, and they will gate the innovation cycles that are out there. And those are operations-driven organizations. Those are bigger, mostly East Coast organizations like to suck really better than anybody else. So you don't get away from both bad habits. You just got to recognize that when you walk into an organization, they are going to suck or spit, right? And identify that quickly, because the operations guys will have a very low tolerance of change that doesn't come at the pace they want. Likewise, if you go into an organization that innovates quickly, don't be gated by the fact that their ITIL change window, they'll disregard that or find a way to sub that out to a smaller iterative into a place where they can get those out there and they won't be held up by the bureaucracy. So my lightning talk is, whether you work in a place that sucks or spit, you got to help your organization rediscover their inner startup. That's kind of the important thing is cross time, distance, and the disciplines, because eventually it's only going to be one conversation with the business, and it's really about driving business with software. So thank you guys.